I found talking on this quite important because it really does emphasize why not only the country but the globe are so angry right now because of the injustices that are happening around the world, and the whole situation with Epstein and Prince Andrew has really magnified how justice and injustices actually do work for the benefit of certain individuals and to the detriment to others. So there's definitely the scales are very imbalanced right now. However, credit where credit's due. I'd like to give a shout out to Miami Herald, especially Julie K. Brown, because without her continual consistency in getting to the bottom of things and not just brushing the story aside, the Epstein files have come out and we're learning so much more about who was involved and names and connections to, from the elite and people who have power and money, and now it's all unfolding. And the reason why I think she deserves a shout out is because she symbolizes that you can make changes if you just persist and you really want to make those changes. They can happen and justice will prevail. And I think she's been a huge important role and factor in all of this, and not much of her gets covered, and not much of Miami Herald does get covered, and it is just about so much about what they have done and now everything that's come out. We don't always give credit to those behind the scenes that have worked so hard to make sure that this situation didn't just get brushed aside and then we just focus all our attention on the so-called normal people and those injustices, and the scales were balanced and justice was prevailed in a sense. So for any of you that don't know, Miami Herald is a major newspaper that is based in Florida, and Julie K. Brown is one of their reporters who made sure she consistently investigated to get the Epstein files uncovered. And now they've been uncovered, the public are aware of what's been going on behind the scenes and the injustices in terms of what the elite are able to get away with, and those who are what we'd call normal, average, everyday people would never get away with. And so we are starting to reveal their punishments due to the connections they have with one another. The elite, they are doing things and getting away with things that are being brushed under the carpet, or they're getting slaps on the wrist for real evil crimes. And it's waking everybody up, because a lot of people used to think that a lot of this was conspiracy theories, and these people were they weren't bad, and they were just angels because they were so high up and they were elite, and a lot of people looked up to them. But that is all now crumbling down, and we're starting to look at things realistically, and we're looking at the reality of evil. And as a collective, I find that what we've always struggled with when it comes to politics or issues or changing the trajectory is the fact that we are against one another. And I believe this happens purposely. So we do go with identity politics and we go towards that. And it does feed our ego, but at the same time, it is destroying any unity, because the real power clearly is showing that it is the elite against the non-elite. And so when they put in things like racism and identity politics and DEI, they're doing it all purposely so that we, the people who have more power, believe it or not, keep arguing with one another. So, as much as I do my videos and I do explain the detriments of DEI, it doesn't mean I'm against anyone that's ethnic minority or who is an ethnic minority, but I'm trying to explain to you how it's actually not benefiting you. But when we take a step further, even more, we can see that the only reason why these are here and we're having two-tier systems, we're having this, I believe, a government word which is racist, which I think is a government plant word, and we're having that division, is so it takes our eyes off of what's really going on, which is the elite against the non-elite. Here's a great example. Now, a lot of us, when we talk about racism, we always go back to slavery. Now, when people think of slavery, most people have this image because of what the government taught us in school, this image of the white man going into a country, the black man's country, and just taking all the black people and bringing them over to their country, when that was never the case. Black slaves were sold by the Arabs, and they were the elite. So the elite were selling to the elite in England, and so they're right at the top, and then us at the bottom, who would never have benefited from slaves because they were so expensive, but that's for another story. But those here would now fight over what they're doing. So they're doing it, they're benefiting from the slave trade. They're the ones that then went to the elite Arabs and then bought slaves for the elites that were in America. And then we weren't benefiting from any of that. In fact, a lot of people were losing their jobs because now they had skilled labor, and they could use that without having, they could focus on other things and projects and investments, while they had slaves out there and they were skilled and they were just building. So obviously the average Joe would be losing jobs because the elite would have the slaves. So we've been programmed to think it was the white man, and so the white man should pay, when that's not the case at all. It's the elite, and we've got to start changing our mindset and the way we see things, because we've been bamboozled for many years. And I'm very grateful in a way, not obviously, I feel for the victims of the Epstein case, but where the silver lining is, and there's always a silver lining, is it's starting to break down what we believe to be true. And now we are starting to question authority, and we are questioning the powers that be. There are people floating around, such as myself, who get labelled as a conspiracy theorist. However, I've had first-hand experience with a lot of powers that be and the elite. I have come against magistrates, judges, lawyers, police officers, and only until I bit more than I could chew, I had a lot of power in the things that I knew. Hence why back then, when I was more involved, I did know that even though people doubted me, what I knew, I'd experienced it firsthand. I'd also went down to the school when Pizzagate was happening to protest, because that will come out maybe 10 years ago. And I had firsthand experience of dealing with people there. So for me, this is very subjective in a sense, but at the same time, I have had real life experience in these things. I do understand that powers, the manipulation of powers in the elite, because I've dealt with them myself. And yes, at the beginning, maybe I can understand why people are scared to stand up to authority, but it's got to that point where we're going to have to be the generation that gets up and does something. A lot of people change the world. Julie K. Brown has changed the world through her investigations. So a lot of people feel like they're waiting to be rescued or waiting for somebody else to kind of move. But we all need to realize that we may be the generation that needs to actually get up and make these changes and start standing up and saying no. Because if we don't, the evil that we're starting to be enlightened to, it's just going to keep seeping out and getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. I'm very careful what I post, because I don't want to overwhelm you with information and things that are going on. So I like to kind of move around and change and talk about different things when it comes to the elite and what they're trying to do and how they're trying to move. And the reasons why they do bring in certain policies, or they teach you certain things, and what they're trying to do in terms of manipulating your narrative of reality. But I do like to kind of change it into whether we're talking about politics, patriotism, celebrity culture, which is very linked to politics, and as much as people aren't quite aware of that. But the Epstein files for me have been a blessing in disguise to really be able to show people how these elite systems are real, and that evil does exist, and a lot of them do abide by it and the reasons why they do is because they have the powers to not have consequences. So a person can commit horrendous acts on a child and get a slap on the wrist. You know, the whole situation with Epstein, he took a plea and he would still be going to work, he'd go back to prison, go off, go to work and come back completely protected. He wasn't in a real highly secured prison, and it was due to the links he had and the connections he had. So if these are the people that are running the country, they are getting away with such evil, and we are still like idolizing certain members of the royal family, and we're starting to see, and it's coming out, who these people really are. These people have so many powers that the rules do not apply to them, and you could go to prison much longer for avoiding your council tax than a person can who has connections, who interferes with children. So this is where we need to start opening up our minds to this. And we're at a point now where we have Keir Starmer, who will put somebody behind bars for thinking and saying what they think out loud over a person who harms children in a way that is abysmal. Prince Andrew was another one. He was very highly protected, and it was just due to who he was and who he knew, and obviously his family. We know his family are the royal family, and he was highly protected, which says a lot about the royals. And so these are things that maybe a lot of you don't want to look at and admit, but this is the reality. And if we don't start looking at it, it's going to get so bad. And for those of us who have children, grandchildren, you don't want to leave this world with this, or when you know this information, for them to clear up, because it's going to just be too late. I definitely think we are the generation that needs to come together in any way we can. You know, these kind of videos, I've had a lot of people help me with, commenting, giving me their opinions, sharing content, actually getting involved and speaking as well, communities. And I do believe the reason why a lot of pubs have been taken away from the UK is so we can't speak to one another. So we have to find other ways of being able to communicate with each other with ideas and, reasonings, and slowly start coming together. We may not necessarily agree with one another, but we still have a common goal. And we can disagree with one another and still have a common goal, that the elite are so corrupt that we need to come together and something needs to change. So I hope you enjoyed my video. You can follow me on all other social media outlets. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you next time.
Do you want to know what it is?